They escorted me out of the building on the same morning we were supposed to ring the NASDAQ bell. My son-in-law didn't even have the decency to tell me himself. He sent security. 2 guys in gray uniforms. One of them used to ask me for career advice. And here's what Derek Walsh didn't know. I'd spent the last 8 months making sure this moment would cost him everything. My name is Hale. I'm 54 years old. For 22 years, I was the CFO of Vantage Industrial Systems. We made precision components for aerospace, defense, and energy infrastructure. Not glamorous. Not the kind of company that gets written up in tech blogs. But the kind of company that keeps planes in the air and power grids running. The kind of work that matters whether anyone notices it or not. I built the financial architecture of that company from a $30 million regional manufacturer into a $900 million enterprise with contracts on 5 continents. I did it with spreadsheets and red-eye flights and 11-hour days and a phone that never stopped ringing. I missed birthdays. I missed anniversaries. I missed my daughter Claire's college graduation because we were in the middle of a debt restructuring that would have taken 400 jobs with it if I'd stepped away for a weekend. She forgave me eventually. She always did. That's the kind of person Claire is. She married Derek Walsh 3 years ago. I walked her down the aisle. I gave the toast. I meant every word of it. Derek was smart, polished, the kind of man who filled a room without seeming to try. He'd built a successful mid-size logistics software company and sold it at exactly the right moment. Good timing. Good instincts. I respected that. I thought he respected me. 6 months after the wedding, Derek joined Vantage's board as a strategic advisor. It seemed natural. He understood growth. He understood markets. What I didn't understand yet was that Derek Walsh didn't just want a seat at the table. He wanted the table. The first time I heard the phrase next-generation leadership, it was in a board meeting. Derek used it in a sentence about our upcoming IPO roadshow. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the slide on the screen. But the words landed on me like a hand on my shoulder. Casual. Testing. The second time was in a phone call I wasn't supposed to overhear. I was working late in my office, door cracked. Derek was in the conference room down the hall with 2 board members. Investors want a CFO who's been through a high-growth IPO in the last 5 years. I heard that sentence as clearly as if he'd said it into my ear. I set my pen down very slowly. Kept working. Didn't move. By the 3rd time, it was in a formal memo. Derek had proposed bringing in a CFO consultant to assist with the IPO transition. Her name was Rachel Voss, 36 years old, former Goldman analyst, great resume. She'd never managed a balance sheet through a down cycle, never held a company together through a supply chain collapse, which I'd done twice. She spoke in frameworks. I spoke in specifics. Those are different languages. And in a crisis, only one of them saves you. I didn't protest the memo. I acknowledged it in writing, CC'd the full board, and said I looked forward to collaborating with Miss Voss during the process. Measured. Professional. I went home that night and sat at the kitchen table for a long time in the dark. Not out of fear, out of calculation. Because I'd seen this pattern before. Not to me personally, but I'd watched it happen to men I respected. Good men. Men who built things, who carried companies through hard years, who got replaced the moment the upswing made them look unnecessary. I wasn't going to let that happen here. Not to this company. Not to 22 years of work. So I started building. Let me tell you about the anchor commitment protocol. It sounds like something out of a securities textbook, and in a way it is. But the version I built was mine. When you take a company public, the IPO price stabilizes based on what your anchor investors commit to buying. Anchors are the institutional buyers, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, large asset managers who agree before the roadshow to purchase significant blocks of shares at the offering price. Their commitment signals confidence to the broader market. Without strong anchors, an IPO can price below range, underprice badly, or collapse on day one. I had spent 2 decades building relationships with the CFOs and investment officers at 3 of the largest anchor candidates we'd ever approached. Not through bankers, not through pitch decks. Through years of quarterly calls, honest conversations during down quarters, and one very specific moment 3 years earlier when I flagged a regulatory risk in our defense contracts that could have cost one of their portfolio companies $40 million. I caught it. I told them. I didn't have to. They didn't forget that. These 3 funds together represented nearly 60% of our projected anchor commitment. In dollar terms, we were talking about close to $300 million in cornerstone investment. Without that, the IPO didn't work at the numbers we'd promised the board. 8 months before the planned offering date, I began a very quiet process. I reached out to each of the 3 investment officers personally. not through official channels. I called them on their direct lines, traveled to meet them in their offices. In Boston, in Toronto, in Houston, I told each of them the same thing, that there was uncertainty in Vantage's leadership structure, that I couldn't speak to what the board might decide, but that their commitment, as we both understood it, was based on a relationship with me and on my continued involvement in the financial strategy of this company. I asked each of them, very simply, whether they would consider a side letter acknowledging that their anchor participation was contingent on my serving as CFO through the closing of the IPO. Side letters in IPO processes aren't unusual. They formalize specific conditions that anchor investors sometimes require. What was unusual was who originated this one. Not the investors, me. Two of the three agreed without hesitation. One of them said, "Marcus, I was wondering when you were going to ask." The third asked his legal team to review it for 2 weeks, then signed. I had those letters notarized and delivered to my personal attorney. Not to Vantage's legal department. Not to the board. To my attorney. To be held in trust. The second piece was smaller but just as important. For 7 years, I had maintained Vantage's external auditor relationship with a firm called Caldwell Partners. Senior partner there was a man named Gene Caldwell. I'd brought him in personally. He knew our books the way a doctor knows a patient. Every footnote, every disclosure, every judgment call we'd made on revenue recognition during the lean years. Gene had one policy that was his own, not required by regulation, but his personal standard. If a company's CFO changed within 90 days of a scheduled audit sign-off, he reopened the review from the last major checkpoint. Fully. It added 6 to 10 weeks to the timeline. Gene had done it twice in his career, and both times had found material misstatements that the outgoing CFO either hadn't caught or hadn't disclosed. He was proud of that policy. He'd mentioned it to me in passing once over dinner. I'd filed it away and never told anyone else. Our IPO audit sign-off was scheduled for 60 days before the offering date. If I was removed before that sign-off, Gene would reopen the review. The timeline to the NASDAQ bell would slip by at minimum 6 weeks, possibly more. The investment bank had already structured their calendar around our date. The roadshow was booked. The SEC filing was on a tight schedule. A 6-week delay would cost the underwriters money, cost the board credibility, and almost certainly cause at least one of our secondary investors to reconsider their pricing model. Derek knew none of this. He'd never built a relationship with Gene. He probably didn't know Gene's name beyond the quarterly report signature. I never told Gene what was happening internally. I didn't have to. His policy was his policy. It would do its job without me saying a word. I want to be honest about something. During those 8 months, there were nights I questioned myself. Not the plan. The plan was sound. But the weight of it. I have a granddaughter named Lily. She's 3 years old. She calls me Pop Pop, and she's the first person in 20 years who makes me feel like nothing I've built professionally matters as much as one afternoon in the backyard. My wife passed 6 years ago from a brain aneurysm. No warning. She was there and then she wasn't. After she was gone, I kept working because I didn't know what else to do, and because the work was the one thing that made sense in a world that suddenly didn't. Claire understood. She never said so out loud, but she understood. What I wrestled with during those 8 months was this. Derek was my son-in-law. He would always be Claire's husband. Whatever happened in that boardroom would follow us all to Thanksgiving dinner and Lily's birthday parties and every quiet family moment we were supposed to have for the rest of our lives. That cost was real. I sat with it. I never found a way to make it not hurt. I just decided that being pushed out quietly without defending 22 years of work would hurt more. The morning of the IPO, I was in my office at 6:45. I had a car scheduled for 7:15 to take me to the exchange. I was reviewing the final prospectus one last time when my assistant Janet knocked and said 2 men from building security were in the lobby asking for me. I knew what it was before I walked out. The way you know certain things when you've worked long enough. Derek was not in the lobby. He was in the conference room 1 floor up, I later found out, having breakfast with the underwriting team and Rachel Voss. He had arranged for my badge to be deactivated at 6 a.m. Janet told me later that she'd received a calendar invite the day before inviting her to an onboarding meeting with the CFO transition team. She'd assumed it was a mistake. She deleted it. She cried when she called me that afternoon. The security guards walked me to my office, allowed me to take my personal items, and escorted me to the elevator. One of them, a man named Carl, who'd worked the building for 11 years and who had a daughter applying to community colleges I'd written a recommendation letter for, looked straight ahead the entire time. His jaw was tight. He didn't say anything because he couldn't. I didn't say anything either. Some silences are the kindest thing you can offer. I walked out through the lobby into the cold November air with a banker's box and my briefcase, and I stood on the sidewalk for exactly 30 seconds. Then I took out my phone and called my attorney. She had been waiting for the call. In her office were 3 sealed envelopes, each one addressed to one of the 3 anchor investment officers, each one containing a formal notice that, pursuant to the side letter agreement dated 8 months prior, and given the removal of Marcus Hale as CFO of Vantage Industrial Systems effective that morning, the signatory's anchor commitment was hereby formally suspended, pending a meeting to discuss alternative arrangements. My attorney couriered all 3 envelopes by 9 a.m. She also sent a copy to Gene Caldwell at Caldwell Partners, informing him as a matter of professional courtesy that a leadership transition had occurred at Vantage. Gene's office would do the rest. I went home. I made coffee. I sat by the window where I used to sit with my wife on Sunday mornings, and I waited. The first call came at 11:17. It was from the investment bank's lead underwriter. He was professional, but there was something careful in his voice, the tone of a man choosing words near an open flame. "Marcus, I'm not sure if you're aware of some developments this morning." I told him I was aware of my own situation, and that I wished him luck with the process. He thanked me and hung up. I could hear in the silence before he disconnected that he wanted to say more. The second call came at 12:40. It was from one of the board members, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been at Vantage for 9 years, and who I genuinely respected. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Marcus, the anchors are pulling out," she stopped. I didn't fill the silence. All 3 of them. And Gene Caldwell's office just notified us that they're reopening the audit. She stopped again. I still didn't fill it. "What did you do?" I told her exactly what I had done and exactly when I had done it. I told her that nothing I had done was outside my authority as CFO. I had cultivated investor relationships. I had worked with those investors to document the basis of their commitment. I had maintained a professional relationship with our auditor. Every one of those things was my job. I'd simply done my job very thoroughly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The offering price is going to crater. We might not even be able to proceed." I said I was sorry to hear that. I meant it. The company I'd spent 22 years building deserved better than what was happening to it that morning. I found out later what had happened in the conference room on the 32nd floor while I was sitting at my window. The underwriters had presented Derek and Rachel Voss with the anchor withdrawal notices at 11 a.m. Derek's first response, according to the junior banker who told the story later at a conference I attended, was that the side letters must be invalid. His second response, after legal confirmed they were airtight, was to try to call the investment officers directly. The officer in Boston didn't take the call. The one in Toronto took it and was apparently very polite and very brief. She said their position was documented, and she wished everyone well. The one in Houston said, and I was told this verbatim by someone who was in the room, "We committed to Vantage because we trust Marcus Hale's judgment." That trust was part of the asset we were buying. Without it, the asset is different. Without it, the asset is different. I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. The audit reopening was the second wall Derek ran into. Gene Caldwell's team notified Vantage's legal department that per their standard protocol, the change in CFO would require a full review restart from the Q2 checkpoint. That pushed the timeline a minimum of 8 weeks. The SEC filing deadline they'd structured the entire offering around became unworkable. The investment bank began internally recommending a postponement. By 2 p.m., Derek had been in 3 emergency calls with the board. By 3, Patricia Osei had called an emergency board meeting for the following morning. By 4, a junior PR person at the bank sent a press release draft to the board for approval that contained the phrase "strategic timing adjustment for the planned public offering," which as investment banker for the wheels came off. I was back at my window when my phone rang at 4:38. It was Derek. I want to say I felt satisfaction when I saw his name on my screen. I didn't. What I felt was tired, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. I picked up. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. He asked if there was a way to walk this back. I told him the anchor agreements were contractual and that Caldwell Partners had their own independent process. I had no authority to influence. He said he understood that but was asking if I would consider returning to complete the IPO. I told him I would need to think about it. He said the board was prepared to offer a significant compensation package for the transition period. I told him again that I would need to think about it. Then I said something I'd been thinking about for 8 months. "Derek, you have a daughter, Lily. You know what it means to want to protect something you built. I built this company's finances the way you'd protect a child. You removed me without a conversation, not a meeting, not a warning. Security. You should think about what that tells Lily someday about how you handle people who built things for you. He didn't answer. I said goodbye and ended the call. The board meeting the following morning lasted 4 hours. Patricia Osei called me at noon. She told me the board had voted to request Derek Walsh's resignation as strategic advisor, effective immediately, citing a breach of fiduciary process in his handling of the CFO transition. She told me the board was prepared to reinstate me with a revised employment contract, an increased equity stake in the IPO, and a formal letter of recognition to be read into the corporate record acknowledging my role in building the company's financial foundation. I told her I appreciated the board's position but that I would not be returning as an employee. I told her I was prepared to serve as an independent financial advisor to complete the IPO process on a consulting basis, with full authority over the investor relationship strategy and the audit timeline management. The fee I named was more than my annual salary had been. She didn't flinch. The IPO closed 4 months later. The anchor investors returned. The offering priced above range. On the morning of the listing, Patricia called me from the exchange floor. She described the bell ringing, the applause, the numbers on the board. I thanked her and told her the team had earned it. I wasn't there. I chose not to be. Some victories belong to the work, not to the person standing closest to the camera. I run my own advisory practice now. Hale Financial Partners. We work with mid-market industrial companies preparing for major liquidity events, IPOs, acquisitions, private equity transitions. I have 4 clients currently. 3 of them came to me through referrals from the anchor investors who pulled out that November morning. The 4th called me after reading about the Vantage offering in a trade publication. He said he wanted a CFO advisor who understood that relationships were the asset. That was enough for me. I still have dinner with Claire every other Sunday. Lily sits in the chair next to mine and tells me about her week in the specific, total commitment way that 3-year-olds tell stories. Like nothing in the world matters more than this exact sentence right now. She's not wrong about that. Derek is no longer in Claire's life. That happened about 6 months after the IPO. I had nothing to do with it. Claire doesn't talk about the details and I don't ask. What I know is that she's doing well. She's strong in ways that remind me every time I see her of her mother. I kept one thing from the whole experience. On the day the IPO closed, Gene Caldwell sent me a handwritten note. It said, in his usual clipped way, "The numbers were right because you built them right." That's all it takes, and most people forget it. I have it on the desk in my home office, right next to the only photograph I have of my wife and me from the year I started at Vantage. She's laughing at something I said. I can't remember what. I've tried. Whatever it was, it made her laugh like that, and that was enough. 22 years is a long time to build something. Longer still to protect it. But some things are worth exactly that kind of patience. And the people who think experience has an expiration date always find out the same way. Eventually. The hard way. On a morning when they need something only you can give them, and you're already gone.